All right, folks, let's look at some implications of situated cognition for instruction, okay? Implications of situated cognition for instruction. Now, we've looked at this theory a little bit, and we see that there's a lot of context is very important, that context matters, and that being in a particular context is going to influence your learning. There's some constructivist theory here, creating your own understanding. And so let's look and see how we deal with this for instruction. Well, a couple of things. The situated cognition theorists have proposed that learning could occur through cognitive apprenticeships. So let's look at that first. Cognitive apprenticeships. So we know what trade apprenticeships are. If you're learning to be a builder, for example, you're trying to maybe be a brick mason. There's different levels of working with bricks and brick masonry, and you might go out with a master mason and learn all about the trade while you're still a journeyman or an apprentice, while you're working with that person to learn the trade. Well, the situated cognition theorists said, well, why can't we have cognitive apprenticeships where we have students working with those who know more cognitively than they do and learning the patterns of thought through interaction with more experienced people in this particular field. So we do that in education, right? We see some cognitive apprenticeships in student teaching. So we've got students who are learning to be teachers. They've had classrooms that they've worked in and on campus, and now they've gone out into K-12 environments, and they spend some time working alongside other teachers, master teachers, and learning how to teach from them through observation. We might see cognitive apprenticeships maybe in, say, a journalism class, where the student produces the school newspaper or they produce the yearbook, and they're working alongside a teacher who has some expertise in doing this, and the students are learning through working with the teacher but not having quite as much responsibility as the teacher does. Another example of a place where we might see a cognitive apprenticeship, something that came to my mind, was science fair projects, right? Students have to do science fair projects. They're working as a scientist would work. They're coming up with hypotheses. They're coming up with ideas. They're designing studies. They're conducting the studies. They're writing these up. And the teacher works with them. The teacher who has more experience helps coach them through this process. So some of the advantages to cognitive apprenticeships are that they are very complex and they're authentic. And complexity can be good, right? Because if we have some complexity, we're requiring people to think and to learn. And they also have authenticity. They're authentic. So if I sit in class and I just have you define a hypothesis and define variables, then that doesn't necessarily help you to work with those things in the same way a scientist would. If I have you do a science experiment or a science fair project, you've learned to work like a scientist. So that's an advantage of cognitive apprenticeships. And you're sharing the culture of that particular discipline. Some disadvantages are that they can be very tedious, they can be repressive, they can get out of hand, they can take a lot of time if we don't manage them well. So that's cognitive apprenticeships, right? All right, another implication of situated cognition for instruction is something called anchored instruction. And way back when anchored instruction first came out, which was the late 80s, early 90s, came out of the Cognition and Technology group at Vanderbilt, and we had Brown, Collins, and Duguid who wrote the sort of first major article on situated cognition. Well, at the same time they were writing their article on situated cognition, or very shortly thereafter, we had folks at Vanderbilt University coming up with something they called anchored instruction, which was teaching that was anchored to a complex environment. Okay, and so they came up with something they called the Jasper Woodbury problem-solving series, Jasper Woodbury, and the idea was that there were a bunch of complex problems that were posed on a video disc. These were all recorded, and teachers could purchase these video discs, and students could get right there in a virtual environment trying to problem solve with Jasper Woodbury. And what the idea was is that maybe we can't really get students out into a real cognitive apprenticeship, and we can't actually have them doing complex problems because it's too complex to do the kind of work that Jasper Woodbury is doing. But if we can put them out there with Jasper virtually, then the kids can still be in a situation and can learn to think in the same way Jasper does. One of Jasper's tasks was that there was an eagle that was injured, and he had to fly an ultralight plane into where the eagle was and bring the eagle out somehow, and he had to figure out the wind and how much fuel and how much the eagle weighed and how long it was going to take him. And so being there with Jasper and thinking through it is very different than just somebody saying to you, the eagle weighs this much, the air is this much, and do the math. So we're trying to make it a more complex environment. Okay. Another thing that's come out of situated cognition is learning communities. And probably some of y'all have learning communities in your schools, right? Where people who are interested in studying the same sorts of things get together and share some responsibility for the learning. And we can do this in a classroom where the teachers and the learners share some responsibility for the instructional goals. I don't tend to operate very well that way, as you can probably tell by now. But the idea is that the teacher and the learner share some responsibility and they work together to share their expertise. So we might have teachers and learners both reading and reading about things, reading different articles, reading for class, and then they come together with different parts of a task and present all the parts together in a communal approach to sharing that knowledge. Okay. All right, so there's communal sharing of information. All right. Okay. Another practice that has come out of situated learning is assessment in situ, or assessment in the situation that you're in. Let's try to move the screen up a little bit here. Oops. We don't have any more screen movement. All right, that's fine. We'll just come right down here. We have assessment in situ, or assessment in the situation that you're in. And again, we see this with teachers, right? We see that student teachers are assessed through their learning environment. They're out teaching, they're in a practice apprenticeship environment, and the clinical supervisor or the supervising teacher comes out there in the field and assesses in the actual context in which you're working. It's very different to write a lesson plan and turn it in than it is to write a lesson plan and to develop all the materials for that lesson plan and to implement that lesson in the classroom. And so this assessment in situ provides a much more complex, sort of realistic measure of what learners can do, in this case in teaching, but it can also be done in other circumstances as well. Okay, so that's just a little bit of a highlight over some of the actual instructional practices of situated cognition, and I'd encourage you to read a little more carefully in your text and learn a little more about these things. Bye-bye.